I wanted to put together a little video to take you through the things we talked about in class because I know it's a little technically dense, and this is, for most of you, your first time using InDesign, which is doubly dense. So I thought I'd help you guys out and run through this really quickly so you could refer to it back when you were, maybe your memory was a little less fresh. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is download all the essentials that I'll need. For some of you guys, you may already have Font Explorer X. It's right here. It's the font management software we talked about in class. If you're doing this on a personal computer, I'd start there and activate any typefaces you need. For the TypeMule files, you're going to want to download that and decompress it. And then we're also going to want to open up the TypeMule list. So for me, these are the typefaces I'm in charge of. I'm going to start with Arno Pro. As I mentioned in class, whenever you see the suffix pro attached to a typeface, typically that means they're optical weights, which is really nice. There's a ton of extra features as well. Typically, you start to get some of those really esoteric type niceties like swash capitals and small caps and true ordinals and all those cool things that you may eventually need. But I also chose it because optical cuts can be a little tricky because they often get conflated with weights. Even I do it myself from time to time. So I thought we'd use that as an example because it's going to be one of the more difficult ones that you encounter. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over and open up my mule measure and mule sample. And the mule measure, we're going to kind of leave to itself for a second. The mule sample, we're going to be using for the bulk of this. So the first thing I want to do is switch all the predefined areas of this file into my assigned typeface. So I'm going to come up to the type panel and click Find Font. So it's up here, and then Find Font. It'll pull up this panel. I'm going to select Lucida Grand, and then, and this, by the way, is the typeface that I'm looking to change. That's the only one I want to select. And then I'm going to type in Arno Pro. You can also select it from the drop-down list. And then I'm going to choose the prototypical weight of my typeface in question. So for me, this is regular. But this is where the optical cuts get a little tricky. And we'll go through this in more depth when we're actually counting out the weights, but it's going to just be, in this case, regular. If you had the weights light, medium, and bold, you would select medium because it's the middle of the three. But you kind of want to pick the one that you would most likely set a book in, if that makes any sense. You wouldn't want to read a whole book in a lightweight font. You probably wouldn't want to read a whole book in a heavyweight font. So just pick the one that you would be most comfortable reading on a day-to-day. But don't pick italics, don't pick small caps, that sort of thing. So I'm going to click Change All, and in the background you're going to notice that it starts to populate. So it's automatically switched out anything that was previously set in Lucida Grand with Arno Pro, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to click Done. And then the next step is that I am going to activate some of the locked master page elements. If you look in our exercise sheet under the instructions, you're going to want to change the large font family name up here to, in this case, Arno Pro, the name of your typeface. What I don't want to do, or what I'm not able to do rather right now, is actually select it. And that's because, as we discussed in class, InDesign is trying to save me from myself. This is a master page element, and it assumes that you want it in the same place on every single page, and it locks it automatically. So we want to go ahead and unlock that. We're going to hold down Shift and Command at the same time and just drag over the whole document. Anything that is a master page element will unlock. And now when I double click on that, I'm able to manipulate it. So I'm going to type in Arno Pro. But for some of you that have significantly larger names and it falls off the page, that's great. Just let it do that. If this was named Arno Pro Opticals, for some reason, I would just want it to want to keep typing until it fell off the page and was kind of obscured by this line right there. The reason for that, again, as we discussed in class, was that's a useful bit of information that displays how economical a typeface is in terms of width. It's a fairly well-proportioned typeface, so you can probably only squeeze like 12 characters on here before it falls off, but there are other typefaces that you may want situationally. One that comes to mind is, say, the headline of a newspaper, where you have tiny little columns and you would want to squeeze as many characters onto a line as possible that have like 18 or 20. And so even the fact that it's falling off the page at a predetermined space is going to be super valuable. So if yours happens to fall off, just let it. That's going to be good news for people who are looking for a typeface that does or doesn't do that. So the next thing I need to do, and I will actually come in here and zoom in so that we can see what's going on. I'm going to change this to Arno Pro. The next thing I'm going to do, as per the instructions, is classify this thing. And it's going to be one of these 5. It's either going to be a serif, a sans serif, script, monospace, or a novelty font. It shouldn't be anything different than one of those 5. It shouldn't be serifed. It shouldn't be scripted serif. It shouldn't be a monospaced serif. It's just going to be one of those 5. Resist the temptation to get crazy with that one. So in my case, it's a serif. We're going to skip this x height, k height, and the ratio for now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put my cursor in here so that it's on Arno Pro, and then I'm going to come down on this palette, this drop-down menu, and I'm going to check for all the different weights. Now again, weights are just that. They're weights. They're not features like Italic. They're not other fonts like a display. That's an optical cut, condensed, extended, those sort of things. What we're looking for specifically are just the weights. I won't go into a larger definition here, but you should, based on our discussion in class, kind of know it when you see it. So for us, there's light, there's regular, there is semi-bold, and there's bold. So there are 4. The other ones, anything else on there, is a feature or an optical cut. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put my cursor in here, I'm going to hit tab, and you'll notice that by putting my cursor right here and hitting tab, it automatically right justifies that. I set that up so that it would line everything up in a nice column, right justified. So that's all you have to do. And after that, you can use your arrow keys and the tab key to kind of navigate through here. So I'm going to hit tab, and I'm going to go, actually, I'm going to put my cursor back up here, and I want to check to see if it has italics. It does. And so I'm going to hold down the shift key and put in a capital yes. That's going to automatically bold the Y so that at a glance I can differentiate it from no. So I want to see if it has small caps. And this is where we get into open type features, which again we discussed in class, so I'll just give you kind of the bare minimum here. But there's a few different ways to do it. You can, of course, come to character and then go to open type, and you can look. Anything typically in brackets means it is missing, but at least that's missing from, it's Adobe thinking it's missing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true, so you're gonna have to do a little bit of detective work and kind of poke around in here. The easiest way to do that, I think, is via the Glyphs palette, which if you haven't already set up your workspaces, you can come down here and click typography, and it'll give you everything you already see on my screen. So for us, we're going to look for small caps, and there they all are. So I'm going to click tab and give it a yes. The other, now notice every time I do that, I have to put my cursor back in the typeface in question. So if I put my typeface over here and then I start looking through this, I'm actually in Myriad Pro. That's a typeface selected. So every time you do that, you're going to want to come up, put your cursor somewhere where Arno Pro is already in use. But if we go back to small caps, I just found them. And it doesn't actually look like there are italic small capitals until you set it in actual italics. They're reflective of that particular feature set. So again, you have to do a little bit of sleuthing. So I happen to know that there are no condensed or extended cuts of this. Now this is a direct conflict with what Adobe thinks is there and what is actually there, and that just has to do with the Unicode character mapping. If the typographer or the foundry in question didn't place things where they needed to be, or at least where Adobe looks for them rather, then Adobe doesn't know how to parse it, and it just says you don't have it. So it says right here that we do not have swash capitals, when in fact there are some. So I'll show you what I mean. So if I go, let's throw that cursor back in here, and I go to the entire font, I'll scroll up, and I'll look on, say, this Q. So there are some swash capitals here. There are some other alternates. So in here, that's going to be good enough. I'm going to press yes and call it a day. The next thing we need to address is figures, which are typically referred to as numbers or numerals. And there's a few ways to figure those out. Again, discussed it in class, but I will refer you to this. There's that reference on the Mule exercise sheet. You can get there. Where'd it go? There it is. So this links to this guy right here, the example, and it'll explain the difference between tabular spacing, proportional spacing, etc. I'm assuming you already know what those are, so I'm just going to show you how to figure it out within your particular typeface. The easiest thing for me is to just open up a new document and type out a few lines of characters. I always use zeros and ones because 0 is typically the widest, 1 is typically the narrowest. And whatever comes at default, it's typically going to be tabular lining figures. So tabularly spaced and lined at the top. So these ones and O's hold the same lateral space as they do, like each line does. So 9 O's is the same, or sorry, 10 O's is the same as 10 zeros is the same as 10 ones. So those are tabularly spaced. The next thing we want to look at is see if they all line up at the top, if they all hit that cap height. And they do. You can figure that out by hitting 1 up there, same height. The next thing you want to look at is to go to character and open type and try something like tabular old style. And you can see that a variety of numerals all takes up the same space as the same quantity of one numeral. So tabular old style. There's also, where is it? Proportional old style. And you can see these are old style figures and they're also proportionately spaced. So they're kerned nice and well. So in our case, we actually have all of them, which is really, 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 really cool. Maybe that seems nerdy, but whatever. So I'm going to come over here and just do yeses across the board. And we're set. So the next thing I want to do is come in here and highlight the column that says slacker, and I want to change those. I want to open up the Glyphs palette, and I just basically want to pick some characters that maybe you think they're cool, but also hopefully they provide a little bit of information. So maybe I'll give this a alternate ampersand. There's 5 different ampersands in the set that can be really helpful to know if you're going to set a bunch of ornate titles. Maybe I want to include something like, well, here's one. So this has true denominators, true numerators, mathematical slash signs, and then also this is a superscript. So it's a huge diversity in the range of things. So if I'm trying to set mathematical equations, if I'm trying to set endnotes, footnotes, that sort of thing, that would be something that's really helpful to know right off the bat. Maybe there's some interesting kind of alternate characters. Maybe I want to throw a true math symbol in there to alert me to that. There are a ton of different options. Complex ligatures. What else we got here? I could find something, alternative language support. That can be super handy. And let's see what else we got here. These ornate figures might be interesting. And then maybe I will give this a, just to alert somebody quickly to the fact that there are small caps. I'll pair a small cap next to its true cap height. So we're good there. I'm going to zoom out. We're just about done. We still have to deal with the X height and the K height measurement. So I'm going to open up that mule measure, and I'm going to go to type, find font. We're going to use that trick again. I'm going to click on Lucida Grand and change it to Arno Pro, change all, and we're done. Occasionally you guys are going to get a typeface that's just too big. It extends beyond kind of the border thereof. You're just going to want to select everything. Rather, in that case, you're going to want to come up to your layers and unlock this. And then when you select everything in here, you can manually adjust these boxes until your characters reappear. So I'm going to relock those, so we're kind of playing with a similarly weighted file. And I'm going to zoom in here. And the first thing I'm going to do, using my arrow key, is grab this line, and I'm going to drag it down. And you can see when the cursor is actively pushed down, there's an X coordinate and a Y coordinate. I want to pay attention to that Y coordinate. So I'm going to write down 395. Don't pay attention to anything after the decimal point, and don't pay attention to the negative point, or the negative mark either. And then the other thing I'm going to do is bring it up here, and we're at about 615, 614. On anything that kind of has a curved top, like these serifed feet, or some of the scripts have some pretty wild terminals, you're just going to want to take the average. It's good enough. So I'm going to write those down and then come back to our primary document over here. We'll zoom in, place my cursor over here. I'm going to write down 395. I'm going to write down 614. Oops. And then I'm going to divide the two. And you're going to be at, in this case anyway, about 64%. So I'm just going to type 64. No reason to put the percentage sign. We just want to be able to compare that number really quickly. This is going to help in a number of ways, but particularly with pairing typefaces. So I'm going to click OK. The final thing I want to do, we're almost done, is change this where it says equerry. I need you to sign your name there so we know who did it. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up into Pages, click on the master page up there, and you'll notice, don't freak out, but you'll notice everything kind of reverted. That's because this is our master page, and as I explained in class, this is our document page. This affects this, so that's why we need to change things up here. However, nothing has been lost. So we're going to go back up to that master page. We're going to go to Layers, oops, wrong, under Rules. I'm going to unlock this, and then I'm going to come down and I'm going to unlock equerry. I'm going to go back to Pages, double click on this. You still won't be able to edit that, but we're going to do our unlock trick, hit Shift Command, and drag around it, and then I'm going to sign my name. Once that's done, I'm going to save it. In case you need to go back and change one thing, I would give it a last name Mule/Arno Pro. We're going to click Save. I already have, so I'm going to hit Cancel. And then I'm also going to go File, Export, High Quality Print, and I will save it as Wiley Mule Arno Pro. And I'll click Save. Click Export. It is going to give you a warning that there's overset text. That is by design, so anytime you see one of those red plus boxes, that means there's overset text. Typically not a good thing if you're trying to print, because that means something is missing from your page that you probably meant to include, but in this case, it won't matter. So we'll click OK. And then it will show up here, and we are all set. All right, so hopefully this helps out, gives a little clarity to the project, and provides something you can refer to at 2 a.m. when you're undoubtedly doing this. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.